but a soft cover. Today, we're joined by author and researcher Chandrachur Ghose to discuss his new book, 1947 to 57, The Birth of a Republic, India, the Birth of a Republic. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is the book. So this book does a deep dive into the decade that shaped India, and it goes into really granular detail into the conversations and the debates that were involved in shaping the modern Indian Republic. Every chapter looks at a different aspect of nation building, right from the decision for the British to leave India to the ways in which the Constituent Assembly debates unfolded. So my first question to you is, why this book and why now?
I think it's a right time to look at how the Republic shaped up. Now that we are celebrating, Amrit Kal and Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, so there are a lot of things that we take for granted, perceptions rather. We take for granted that India became free through non-violent Gandhian movements. Freedom was brought to us by Mahatma Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
Democracy was established in India by Pandit Nehru, and uh, how things were very nice and cozy. The British just left because of our non-violent movement. So a lot of narrative building has happened over the past 70, 80 years, which over the time has become into kind of taken for granted perceptions. So I wanted to look, before this, I had written the biography of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And there were many ideological undercurrents, which I thought it would be interesting to see how the conflicts of pre-independence time, how they were negotiated after independence, because they did not just evaporate, they did not vanish. Those forces were there, those ideologies were there, the ideas were there. So there was always the mainstream Gandhian high command, but there was always the opposition after the Netaji's exit from India. There was still a very vocal opposition, which was represented by people like Jayaprakash Narayan, Ram Manohar Lohia. So my question, I wanted to figure out why the alternative stream could not emerge as strong. Then there was Shama Prasad Mukherjee representing another current of thought. So why couldn't these streams establish themselves in the mainstream as much as we would have expected? And what made the Nehruvian India so strong and the mainstream narrative?
Yeah, actually, I do want to pick your brains on Bose, but before we get to that, what you just said, the Nehruvian model, right? Nehru was such an important figure in the shaping of India, and has kind of and is present throughout this book, but is also very, like, the role that he played in essentially laying down the ideals of the nation cannot be understated. So can you tell us a bit more about his model of leadership, and why was that? What did that mean for the India of that time, and how does it translate today?
See, for Pandit Nehru, he was the chosen leader. He was chosen leader, and he was nominated by Mahatma Gandhi as his uh, political and spiritual heir. And Mahatma Gandhi very clearly in one of his speeches, one of his prayer talks, clearly said that, well, there are two people that who are my staunch followers. There is Sardar Patel, and then there is Pandit Nehru. But Sardar Patel is not my heir. Pandit Nehru is my heir. So in unambiguous, clear terms, he laid the ground. And it was very clear to everybody that whatever the popular feeling is, Pandit Nehru, of course, was very popular, but
Yeah.
there were other popular leaders too. So the competition, if I might use that word, was removed by Gandhiji at the very beginning. So by choosing Nehru, putting him at the pedestal. Now there are certain things, certain changes that happened in the spirit of the freedom movement. So if you look at the time before the Second World War, the Congress had formed ministries because of the 1935 reforms, the government of India at 1935, which came in, allowed the Congress to form ministries in the provinces. And then they resigned when the war started, the conflict with the British government started. Somehow along the way, after the Quit India movement, the whole negotiation moved away from the on-ground mass movement to chamber dialogues.
Right.
So it became, that was very cleverly done and very nicely done by the viceroy of the time, Lord Wavell, who foresaw, before the World War came to an end, Wavell took up the pains. He saw that as soon as the war ends, the soldiers that have been recruited, they will be decommissioned, they will go back home. There will be expectations about the standard of living, about the facilities that they got. There will be deindustrialization, descaling of industrialization, which had come out during the period of the war. So and the when the war ends, the political leaders and the workers will have to be released. So it will be a very volatile situation. So he pestered Churchill that before we reach that situation, let's do something. Churchill was not at all eager. He was not at all keen to do anything to progress India to a constitutionally or to take India
Right.
towards freedom or even dominion status. And that time, as the war came to an end and the leaders were released, what Wavell had foreseen happened exactly almost to the word. The INA soldiers had come back, and there was a massive movement around them when they were put on trial publicly in the Red Fort. And that movement that started led on to widespread unrest across the country. The Royal Indian Navy revolt in the Royal Indian Air Force, and across the army. The British administrators were scared of only one thing, that this unrest and dissatisfaction was spreading in the army. And the army was the main instrument for holding India together, to hold India in subjugation. So when that became very clear, uh, the announcement was made by Attlee in 1947 that they would leave by 1948 June. So that announcement came very suddenly. It was not that they were discussing a date and we should leave at that time. We should leave. There
Yeah.
was no question of leaving by a particular date. That
Or
came very
exit
suddenly.
plan.
So, and that when that mass movement was gradually fizzled out, because Congress was against the mass movement. It sounds very strange to hear today, but all the violent movement that was going around because of the INA trials and the Royal Indian Navy revolts, it was Sardar Patel and Pandit Nehru who took the responsibility to calm them down and tell them that, well, we are non-violent organization, it's a non-violent country, so we cannot go into this kind of mass movement. We are talking to the Britishers, and then the cabinet mission happened in March 1946. They came down, the cabinet mission came down, negotiations started. So the whole mass movement energy was channelized into that. Uh, I mean, negotiations and discussions.
Right.
It was it. So the terms, Congress was no more in a position to dictate the terms, and more, and the equation was complicated with with a strengthened Jinnah, who had gained much more power during the Second World War because of the encouragement that he got from the conservative government in Britain, particularly from the Conservative Party, Churchill and all, and the nationalist Muslims who had been with the Congress, even those who were not within the Congress but had extended the support to the Congress, gradually they started migrating towards the Muslim League. So, there was a lot of, I would say that, unthinking activity, action on part of the Congress where it lost a lot of ground and and did not really think ahead as to what was going to happen. It was terribly, terribly focused very narrowly on getting the power in its hands. So when that happened, Congress came to power, but it it was only about Congress. The 1946. This is a very when we talk about democracy today and compare it to those days, it's pertinent to remember that the elections that happened in 1945 and 46, the elections to the Central Legislative Assembly and the provincial assemblies, was based on a very narrow electorate. The Central Legislative Assembly was less than 1% of the population. And if I remember correctly, the provincial assemblies were somewhere around 5 to 6% of the population.
Right.
And those who were elected on the basis of this kind of franchise, they were the ones again who elected members to the Constituent Assembly. So if you look at the pyramidal structure, both the provincial assemblies and the Constituent Assembly was elected on a very narrow base. We don't know what would have happened if we had gone towards complete total adult franchise. And that is very striking point, because it was Congress's stand from 1931 to get complete 100% adult franchise. And even in its election manifesto in 1946, Congress had argued for adult franchise. But somehow it retracted. It was not ready to wait anymore to do the electoral rolls. That would have taken a few more months. They were not ready to wait. So they went ahead with that. And the result was that this Constituent Assembly was eventually turned into the central legislature,
Right.
and which governed India till the first elections. The first members were elected and came to the parliament. That was sometime early 1952.
Yeah.
So from 1946 to 1952, for 6 years, India was governed by a legislative assembly, which was very elected on a very narrow population base. So that's something which we need to relook and find out the implications. What could the implications be if the voter base, the electoral base was widened, even if not 100%, if it was 50%, probably there would have been a greater variety of political opinion reflected. But that did not happen. So it came very nicely packaged in a manner. Power was transferred when Mountbatten came. It was a palace dialogue between Pandit Nehru. We see Mountbatten taking Pandit Nehru to Shimla, discussing the drafts again and again with him. So one person picked up by the viceroy, and he is discussing with him about the modalities of transfer of power, deciding on accepting dominion status, which the Congress was dead against all these years, accepting the membership of Commonwealth, which the Congress was dead against all these years. So a lot of its ideas, its objectives, its ideals, where I mean, the Congress went back on it for the immediate interest.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, at the time of the transfer of power.
That's what it was. Even though Nehru was sort of like the natural successor, this kind of is how things worked out. But even, and that's an important point, that the Constituent Assembly represented a very narrow, limited India. That being said, it was still extremely controversial, and there were lots of points of conflict, even though this was largely a group of like similar-minded people from similar caste and class backgrounds.
Absolutely.
Right? So the other, besides Nehru, the other person who played such a big role in kind of in shaping the constitution was Dr. Ambedkar. And I know that the two butted heads. They agreed on a lot of points on what kind of modern nation India should be, but they also butted heads on several issues. One of which is the Hindu Code Bill, and I kind of want to talk about that. That was in India's first elections. You mentioned this in your book in 1952. The Hindu Code Bill was a huge electoral issue for Nehru and the Congress. The person who was standing against Nehru in the first election was against the Hindu Code Bill. And this kind of debate has sort of, over the years, we still see it. It's still showing up in modern political debates in the form of the Uniform Civil Code. So just wanted to get a sense from you on what that debate looked like in the Constituent Assembly. What were the disagreements between Nehru and Ambedkar, and just how did that pan out? What kind of nation were they thinking of building?
See, because of the narrow electoral base, what happened is almost everyone who got elected was a Congress member.
Yeah.
Some people were chosen, people like Ambedkar, people like Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Alladi Krishna Swami Iyer, who was a constitutionalist, and people like him were picked up a few. You can count them in fingers, and they served in the committees and subcommittees which drafted the constitution, made the laws, and which was then subsequently debated on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. But the advantage of having a single party dominance in the Constituent Assembly was that even if there was opposition, even if there was criticism, it was very easy to beat it down. So once a committee or a subcommittee reaches a conclusion by discussion amongst themselves, and brings a particular clause of the constitution or a particular law onto the floor, even if there is criticism. So someone like Hari Vishnu Kamat, who was not per se a congressman, but he was with Subhash Bose in forward bloc, but he got elected in Congress ticket. Congress gave him the place. Congress gave a place to a lot of people like him, which was a very wise decision by Gandhiji and
Yeah.
the Gandhian High Command. I mean, they agreed to do it, and it was a very nice thing to do, and the wise thing to do. But they were so few in number that their opposition was never effective. They could criticize as much as they wanted. Now, the Hindu Code Bill was obviously there was a wide uh, divergence in opinion and a large scale opposition and large scale strong opposition from the conservative sections of the society, and so much so that even it led to a conflict between the prime minister and the president. Rajendra Prasad was against
Against
pushing
it.
it,
Yeah.
and it led to a clash of personality, an ego clash, and but at that time the structure of the parliament, the way it was, the Constituent Assembly turned into central legislature, and then the provisional parliament. So the structure was such that if the government wanted to push a bill through a particular part of the law, it would not be too difficult. But Nehru saw saw reason in not bulldozing the entire bill. So it was debated and debated and debated and broken into parts, and only one small part was passed before the first general elections, and that was the point of contention between Nehru and Ambedkar. Ambedkar resigned.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why he resigned was on that point, that he was given the assurance that the bill would be passed, but Nehru saw it was he saw the opposition across the country, so he saw the need to build a public opinion. It was not a law which could be bulldozed, imposed from the above, and then a society cannot be changed like that. So
Yeah.
dialogues were necessary. And in that first general election, what uh, the election campaign that was conducted by Nehru himself, it is practically unimaginable even in this day of easy communication. The way he covered the length and breadth of the country, thousands of rallies and meetings that he addressed, and he was uh, he was a very voluminous writer
Yeah.
and
Very prolific.
speaker. So his speeches were never short. I mean, he would go on speaking for hours,
Yeah.
and whenever he used to write, he used to write and write and write. So everything about him was very exhausting. So, I mean, it is not wrong to say that though he was a politician and by nature a politician, and the qualities of politician were of course within him, but he was uh,
Isn't
an
it?
intellectual who would see to the different sides of a problem and then make up his mind, not always according to the merits of a problem of an issue. Well, he had his own way of thinking, own worldview, so he would take a decision based on that. But he had the capability to look at all aspects of a particular problem, a critical problem. And then he had, of course, a few people who were very close to him. I have tried to understand why only such few
Such
people were
people.
so close to him. He would open up only to few people like Vijay Lakshmi Pandit,
Mhm.
V.K. Krishna. So these are the few people. Padmanabhan Naidu, to some extent, yes, but emotionally, politically, debating, discussing issues, mostly he would do with Vijayalakshmi Pandit and V.K. Krishna.
Yeah.
And those letters are his notes and letters are very informative. So that I'm sorry, I lost track. So he brought the issue back only after the first general election,
Right.
when the points that he had been advocating or the Congress party had been advocating had been tested on the ground and had received the proper popular support. He could claim that I have the popular mandate. I
Mm.
am not imposing it. I could have, but
Yeah.
I haven't. I'm back with the popular mandate with a huge majority, and now it's time to push through the reforms. So that was, I think, a very intelligent way of doing it, even if it cost him Ambedkar. But I mean, obviously, Nehru was a person who was very, I would say, moody, arrogant at times. He wouldn't care much as to what others are thinking about him, and he wouldn't think much of people around him. And in his letters, becomes very clear the way he talks about his political opponents or even his political colleagues in the Congress Working Committee. I mean, it shows that he considers himself at a much higher level than them, and he was very clear about it. Never
Yeah,
tried to hide it.
yeah, there was a certain irreverence in which he discussed his fellow parliamentarians, especially people who disagreed with him, right? And I mean, this was an issue even later on in his life. He was too dependent on the thoughts and opinions of his advisors like Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and V.K. Krishna Menon. And you kind of touch upon that as well. You know, you can see the way that Nehru changes as a statesman and as a
Yeah.
politician. But I mean, someone who did march to the beat of their own drum throughout was Bose, and you've written extensively on Bose. You've even got one of your best-selling books is on Bose. Can you tell us if he'd been around at the time of the Constituent Assembly debates, if he could put in his 2 cents into the shaping of India, what kind of vision do you think Bose would have carried forward or pushed for?
See, one thing which happened, which if Bose had been in India after the Second World War, things wouldn't have gone the way they did because Bose was not in favor of negotiating with the British. That is one thing which he made clear and constantly warned Indians that keep on the mass struggle because, and that was his criticism against, particularly against Gandhi and Nehru, that if they get the opportunity, they will go onto the discussion table and make certain compromises on the Congress ideas. That was a constant thing that he kept saying and writing since the time he quit Congress. He left. He was not. He did not quit Congress. Was thrown out. So after he was thrown out of Congress, and that was very clear, and that was one of the reasons why he was thrown out of the Congress, because he did not believe that Gandhi was or the Indian High Command was doing enough what needed to be done, because his thing was give the British an ultimatum
Yeah.
of 6 months. In 1939, early 1939, his point was give them an ultimatum and then let's go plunge into a mass movement. Gandhiji said that no, we are not ready for it. There is too much violence around. And the strange thing is, whenever Subhash Bose used to say something, Gandhi would oppose, fight tooth and nail, and after a few years, he would come around to that position. So the first idea about developing a parallel government came from Bose in 1929 in the Lahore Congress, where Congress adopted the incomplete independence resolution. So Subhash Bose said that all this is very good and fine, but what is the point of adopting just the resolution if we can't implement it? So let's declare a parallel government and go into a straight ahead clash with the British government, with the British Raj. And Gandhiji ridiculed it, lampooned it practically. Sir, we are not ready. We don't have even enough number of Congress flags in our villages and our towns. How can you think that we can make such a move? But when it came to Quit India movement, so Gandhi opposed the Bose's proposal of giving an ultimatum to the British in 1939 also. But then when it came to 1942, Gandhi, according to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Gandhi was extremely inspired and influenced by what Subhash Bose had done by that time. That he had gone out of India, formed a government in exile, was raising army. So that he did not subscribe to that path, but he was very inspired. That is what Maulana Abul Kalam Azad wrote in his book, India Wins Freedom. So in 1942, the call for Quit India was partly inspired by Subhash Bose's activity. And what Gandhiji said was a direct contradiction of what he had said in 1929. In 1929, I just said that he had said that we are not prepared, we don't have enough Congress members. In 1942, when he said that leave India if necessary, to God and anarchy, just quit. So that was a desperation, call of desperation. That did not, and Quit India did not have a plan. Gandhiji himself also did not know what he was going to do. He had hoped that the viceroy would, like other times, call him for a discussion, a parley, and then they would develop an agreement and kind of thing. But the British government was not ready for it. They put everyone in prison. So this was a very, very clear line of demarcation between Bose and the Gandhian High Command. If Bose had come back at the end of the war, there would have been no discussion with cabinet mission or Mountbatten. There would be no Mountbatten. Because what Jayaprakash Narayan was trying to do and could do only at a very small scale, uh, 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 Jayaprakash Narayan and his other colleagues in the Socialist Party, those in the Communist Party at that time, they were trying to build up a mass movement, but they did not have, they had neither a very charismatic leadership
Or the
in the front
resources. Yeah.
who could bring together the entire forces, or they did not have that plan as to what can be done. Okay, mass movement, fine. What after that? So, had Subhash Bose been back after the war, things would have been very, very different, and the Gandhian Congress would have probably been compelled to join him because of the movement that he would have done. Because at that time, his stature was so high. His image, that is, image in 1945, end of 1945, 46, was so high amongst the minds of Indians that it would have not have been possible for anybody to go against him. And if he had, particularly if he had been able to garner all the forces, marshal all the forces, and led a movement to throw the British out. Because the ground was ready. There was a volcanic movement going on because of the INA trials, reaction to the INA trials, the revolt in the Royal Indian Navy, in the Army, Air Force. Everything was going slipping out of the hands of the Britishers. It was
Right.
only the intervention of the Gandhian leaders which put a halt to that line of development. Had Bose been back, that would have accelerated, and India perhaps would have uh, been able to make a more, uh, a more Indianized choice of what to do after pushing the British Raj out. So rather than being dictated by the cabinet mission that you come here, form a constituent assembly like this, group your provinces according to ABC, Muslim majority, non-Muslim majority. Partition would have been a very big question mark if Bose had come back, because he had enormous following among the Muslims who genuinely trusted him. And what the Congress had been preaching all these years, he had actually demonstrated through the INA and the provisional government of Azadi, because he had demonstrated that communalism can be defeated.
Mm.
So all these factors could have worked in his favor, and India would, my understanding, that is my belief, that India would have gone in a different route altogether, not the path of negotiation.
Right. I mean, the India at that time looked very different as well. And you just touched on that. Geographically, it looked very different. The problem of integration was
Absolutely,
huge.
absolutely.
There was a lot of reorganization that had to happen. There was questions on how to reorganize India, whether regionally or on linguistic terms. Can you tell us a bit more about, because that's a very like brass tacks, physically making a nation. Can you tell us a bit more about how that process unfolded and whether that kind of smoothed over fissures or deepened them?
See, the biggest problem at the time of the constitutional negotiations in 1945 and 46 were the 500 odd princely states.
Yeah.
And they came in different shapes and sizes. Somewhere as big as a state now, and somewhere as big as small as a small town. But they were all princes, kings, and they had their own benefits, they had their perks and privileges. But when the government, British governments actually announced that once we leave India, when he made that announcement of 20th February 1947, that we are going to pack up and leave on by June 1948, and we are going to leave everything behind. We are not going to take the responsibility of those princely states, 500 odd princely states. And then the princes realized the problem that they could not many of them could sustain on their own. So what was the way? And then started the process of bringing them into the Indian Union. And but it took more time. I mean, here again, I'll have to bring in Bose, because the states people movement, which had started from the mid 1920s, it had developed inspired by the Congress. But the Gandhian leadership had already always maintained that Congress will not go into these states, into these princely states, and agitate. It is the responsibility of the local population. Congress will not. Subhas Bose opposed this line of thinking. He said that why India have to be seen as one whole. There is nothing like princely state, an Indian India and a British India. His idea was that India is one whole, and if we are thinking in terms of independence, we have to think in terms of independence of the whole country. So there we should not maintain a line of demarcation between the princely states and the British Indian states. So, but the Congress continued to do that till the Second World War, and as a result, the Congress had not been able to get its roots in those provinces, in the Indian states, in the princely states. Had they been, had they done that earlier, uh, I felt after going through all the literature, the documents, and everything, the negotiations, probably Congress would have been at a stronger position to negotiate with those princely states when the constitution was being formed. The princely states did not enter the Constituent Assembly immediately. They
Right.
took a lot of time in a graded manner. They in a phased manner they entered the Constituent Assembly, and then certain states like Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore, they wanted their own independence.
Yeah.
Jammu and Kashmir surprisingly was not even approached by the Indian Union till the invasion.
Yeah.
I find that very striking because if India was negotiating, fighting with Hyderabad, it was negotiating with Travancore,
Junagadh.
negotiating with Mysore, but Jammu and Kashmir, nobody thought or nobody wanted to approach Jammu and Kashmir. They just left it at that. So it was only after the invasion that Jammu and Kashmir was compelled to sign the Treaty of Accession, the instrument of accession. And the issue of this states again would have been very difficult at the initial stage to get them into the Constituent Assembly and the Indian Union had Mountbatten not exerted the force on behalf of the Congress. The Mountbatten did a phenomenal job of convincing, coaxing, coercing the kings, the princes, and bring them into the Indian Union.
Into the fold.
Yeah. And once that was done, deciding the terms and conditions and uh, making sure that, I mean, they get integrated with the existing provinces and all that, that was done admirably by Sardar Patel and uh, assisted by VP Menon. So it happened really in two phases. The first thing was to get the approval, the the concurrence of the princes by Mountbatten to enter the Indian Union, and then the second phase was to integrate with the states, with the provinces, and reorganize them accordingly later on. I mean that's a process that continued for many years.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of the note on which your book ends as well. You talk about the Northeast and the kind of chaos that was being unleashed there, and the political situation in the Northeast when it came to integrating with India. It's sort of, or like you touched on how it was unfolding. It's sort of similar to what we're seeing happening in the region today. Why was it so difficult, especially for region at a regional level to integrate? But also, did you feel this fear of a constitutional breakdown that you talk about in your book, was that justified in the case when it came to integration?
No, not really. There was no fear of constitutional breakdown at any point. I mean, the other states, if you're talking only about the northeastern states, there was a history behind it,
Yeah.
and then the separation with Burma in 1935, Burma going out of the Indian Union as a different country, separate country. So, and the population, the hilly area, the tribals, the valley population, these were big factors even in the 1930s and 1940s when I mean when the Congress formed ministries, it had to consider all these factors, that what kind of support it would get from the valley population, from the tribals, and The tribals were very secluded and did not entertain any kind of external interference. And these aspects were discussed and considered by the Constituent Assembly in minute details.
Yeah.
And it was a conscious decision to move slowly, gradually for the process of integration. And Nehru, obviously being a Democrat and also a bit indecisive on critical matters, he would postpone decisions or not jump into something, he would let things develop.
Mm.
Sometimes they backfired, they blew up, like it happened in Kashmir. Uh, but he left a lot of decisions to the government of Assam as to how to interact with them, how to integrate them, and to set up the administrative mechanism. So he would not send the military immediately to capture the area or to uh, push back the rebels. He would not send a full intelligence bureau operation into that area. He would not set that up. So he would ask the Assamese government to take necessary steps. And there were many slips between the cup and the lip. There were many miscommunications, misunderstandings, and differences in objectives between the central government and the government of Assam,
Mm.
and the aspirations of the local population, what they wanted, how they wanted it, something that was very, very deftly exploited by a leader like Fizo. So Fizo, if he was able to capture that entire area and emerge as a leader, he understood the local dynamics. He understood the ways that he could he could put the forces together against the central government and get a sort of, if not independent and completely autonomous area. So these forces were constantly playing, and the mainstream politicians, including Nehru and the government of Assam, they did not either fully understand the gravity, the complexities, or they did not act on time.
Yeah.
So that was the, I mean, I cannot imagine any prime minister in our country facing a situation where, as it happened when Nehru took the Burmese premier in Nagaland to attend a meeting, and he wanted to show off that how the tribals are integrating. And then he goes to inaugurate, goes to speak at a public meeting, and there is barely anybody sitting
Once
other than
again,
some local government officials. So thousands of people had gathered in the morning, and within minutes they vanished, they disappeared. They did not want to hear Nehru,
yeah.
and he was extremely, extremely humiliated by the that experience. And the letter that he wrote after coming back to the chief minister of Assam was a bitter
Scathing.
and kind of
Scathing.
very stern. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so true. Just to wrap up, so I wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit. There's been a rise in interest in understanding history and understanding the origins of India. Do you see that playing out? Was that part of the decision to work on this book? What are the lessons that you intend for us to take from this?
See, one thing is that okay, this is something. One of the fundamental reasons why I decided to write this book is we don't always realize how much of modern India is still rooted during that period. So if you take the spirit of governance, the spirit of functioning of the legislatures, the the spirit behind the role of the prime minister, and to this day, if you read government files, the bureaucrats, they follow the same format in their notes which they followed at the time of Nehru. And Nehru laid down certain norms and certain formats which are still blindly followed. His thought process, I'm not passing a judgment here, I'm just observing a historical phenomenon that he started certain procedures, he started certain processes which are very deeply ingrained uh, till till now in our uh, institutional politics, institutional bureaucracy, bureaucracy including the babus in the offices to the intelligence agencies and army, etc. Uh, and and the you know how you look at how you deal with the judiciary. So it's still a burning question. Every day it becomes a new issue. How is the government supposed to deal with a judiciary which is not agreeing with it, with its own laws or own thinking? So the judiciary interprets a law in its own manner and passes a judgment which is not liked by the government. So what does the government do? Nehru laid down the principle very well. He said that okay, it's the courts can interpret the law, but it's up to me to form the law, to frame the law. So if I don't like it, I will change the law. And that's how the first amendment of the constitution came in, because the government, Nehru government, did not like the pronouncements or the orders of the high courts and the Supreme Court, and they decided to bring in the first amendment to the constitution. To be
Yeah,
happy to
thank
do
you,
that.
sir. It was
Okay, thank you so much, Vandana.
yeah. I'll be in touch. Bye.
Sure, sure.